It's been like a 2-month hiatus. We're just getting busy with life. Things are changing and whatnot. But, regardless, I have a package from Apos. It's the Moondrop Stellaris, which is in this box. And let's just kind of jump straight into it, yeah? Now, this box is definitely one of the bigger boxes of Moondrop, probably for more space for this waifu picture here, which is quite nice. But, inside, anyways, we're going to get the usual stuff. So, like the IMs, a cable, some nice foam tips, as well as some nice quality silicone tips, a carrying case, and, of course, some paperwork. Alright, then let's just kind of jump straight into it, starting with the cable. Well, the cable it's very simple. It's your standard unbraided cable, but I still think it is well built. It feels pretty well built anyway. The middle splitter is very typical of Moondrop. It's that circular splitter, but what's interesting is they decided to go with a metal chin slider. It's just a nice little piece of detail, I suppose. But other than that, it's it's kind of an unremarkable cable, but it's a nice one. Now, as for the IM themselves, they're very well built with their all metal body, and the design is, while not similar in shape to the Starfields, has the same kind of language, what with their blue paint job and gold accenting. I think it's a really pretty set of IEMs, honestly. However, aside from looks, when it comes to the design of it, yes, it is very solid with the whole metal build, but they are kind of chunky if we look at the side profile as well as the inside. This is a much larger IEM, I would say, especially with these long nozzles, and that then of course feeds into how it fits in your ear in terms of comfort, which I found to be it's okay, but not my preferred kind of fit. Due to the really long nozzles of these guys, they kind of stick out of your ear a little bit. They don't go all the way in. This may be by design to fit the drivers and whatnot, but despite this, due to the hooks, and at least with the silicone tips that I'm using currently with them, the ones that they came with obviously, it fits pretty well and it sits pretty well, but I can imagine for some people, due to the size of these IMs and the weight of them, they may slowly drag over time, especially as you start getting warmer and, start moving around a little bit more. But comfort, I honestly did find them very comfortable for a very long period of time, though I didn't like the way they just kind of sat with how the long nozzles are. I thought they would go further in my ear, but, they can't just because of the sheer size, Still, despite all what I've just said, I did find them personally very comfortable in my ears. I just didn't like how long these nozzles were, creating that gap between the IEMs in my ear. But your mileage, I guess, will vary depending on the size and shape of your ear and what tips you use. I do think the tips on these guys are really good, the ones that they come with. These silicone tips especially are very tacky, and they just, I don't know, I really like them a lot. Alright, now let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of these guys, which is their sound. That's what you guys are probably mostly here for, honestly, their sound and how well it'll do in gaming. So I know the first question people are going to ask is, do they sound anything like the Starfields? And the answer is no. The Starfields have a kind of warmer sort of sound. These lean far more on the brighter side of things. It's got a brighter sound. Now, I can imagine some of you guys might think that having a brighter sound means they probably won't have a lot of bass, and you'd be half right. It's got an okay punch in the bass, so the mid bass is alright, but at the lower end of the spectrum, it's not so great. You're not going to get a lot of those deep rumbliness out of it. The reach of it is just okay in that range. It's not the most rumbly present bass. It's just there. It's enough to make a noise, it's enough to give you a punch, so I can imagine people who are bass heads won't like this at all. Now then, this also means that it won't bleed into the mids or the highs, so the mids and the highs, as one can expect, are the star of the show, no pun intended. So the mids are kind of forward-ish along with the highs, and you get a lot of detail, a lot of clarity in both of these regions, though I do think that there is more of that in the highs compared to the mids. The mids are alright. There is an okay amount of detail and clarity there, but I don't know, it could be a little bit better. And when you get to the highs, while it is very, sparkly and bright, sometimes I did find it to get a little sharp for me, but that's probably because I'm a little bit high sensitive. So if you're kind of sensitive to high notes, this might hurt you a little bit. However, still, I do think the tuning overall for these guys, while, kind of bright leaning, it does a pretty good job in being sort of more on slightly on the musical-ishness, but still being sort of on the analytical-ishness. There's somewhere in between there, but definitely far leaning more towards analytical. When it comes to soundstage and imaging, I think it also does a pretty okay job. The soundstage was pretty large, but I do think it could feel more big if it had more oomph in the bass. It was alright. I do think it had a fairly roundish shape. There's a decent amount of width and depth. Height was actually kind of there. It was alright. It wasn't the greatest, but it was pretty okay. Imaging was really, really good. It wasn't mega pinpoint, but I think it used the stage well. It was pretty good. And this then leads its ability into gaming, especially shooter games. One would imagine that it would do well, and you are right. These do pretty well in competitive shooter games, in particular, where you're looking for people from lefts and rights and whatnot, and tracking people. So, in those games, these things do a great job due to the brighter sound profile and how it handled the details and sounds of the footsteps and whatnot. I can imagine, though, you might have a little bit of trouble when we had a little bit more vertical room, but I still think in that respect, it does a fairly good job compared to other IEMs in this, like, kind of bracket. This is exactly what I'd imagine someone could expect out of a planar magnetic driver IEM if they're going to be using it for gaming. Now, while it does really well in, like, more competitive shooter games, it doesn't do, I mean, I can't say it doesn't do well in non-competitive shooters, like more open world, less tracky kind of games, more like casual, maybe more competitive depending on how you play it, but like open world games, I think it just did alright. It was cool to hear the details of sound and like the crunch of like the grass and dirt and whatnot, but I just feel like if it had more oomph in the lower bass, it would give more weight to the sounds, so then the world would just feel all the more bigger, which I guess you could mess around with EQs to make these sound really, really good, but a lot of us out there aren't like super audio nerds, and we just want to plug and play and call it a day. So if you're plugging and playing, I think these things, they're just okay if you're going to be using it for like less competitive, more open world kind of situations, more for enjoyment. I think they are definitely, of course, leaning towards shooters then, so there is that. These then would be essentially like the IMs you would go to if you were thinking about the Starfields, but deep in your heart you're more of a hardcore shooter game player where you want that tracking sound. Then the Stellaris would be the ones you'd be going for. But if you're going to be someone who likes hopping on more open world games, you're going to be playing more Elden Ring, maybe some more the Legend of Zelda, then I don't think these would be like your primary choice. They'll do okay in them, but these are definitely more for the more serious shooter kind of person. These are for someone who started on a Tin T2 and wanted a direct upgrade to it. And yeah, that's basically it. So, if you're like someone who thought you liked the Tin T2 sound and you wanted an upgrade to it, these are essentially kind of it. The tuning's a little bit different, but it's around that same ballpark. Now, something I did think about when I was using these guys is how well they performed in like those competitive shooters compared to other IEMs that also have planar magnetic drivers. So far, I think these perform the best. They are definitely a little bit more expensive, or if sometimes the same price depending on what you're looking at, like the Tin Hi-Fi P1 Maxes and whatnot, or like the Soundnotes Dioko. Those ones are just alright in those kind of situations. I think these actually can be reliably used for those games. So yeah, good job, Moondrop. These are pretty good. Granted, if you're going outside that competitive shooter realm, it's just I'd pick something else at that point, even something cheaper. Even then, I guess if you don't have like a lot of money in your pocket, you can technically still get some cheaper IEMs that will still perform really well in competitive shooter games for a lower price than these guys, but they won't sound as good, if that makes sense. Like, it gives you the information you need, but that audio information won't sound as nice, if that makes sense. So, that's usually what happens when you, pay for a cheaper IEM that has similar technicalities. It just has less detail sometimes, lower quality sound overall, and, ups and downs. But, the upsides to this guy were the higher sound quality does have some downsides to it, and that has to do with the fact that they are planar magnetic driver IEMs. This means they need a little bit more juice to power, so if you don't got the best source for, the best base, the place you plug your stuff into to listen to music, if that isn't really good at giving things juice, then it's not the greatest choice, because you start introducing a little bit of noise into the sound. So you want like something good to plug it into. So these are definitely something I would imagine someone who has a proper audio interface or a DAC or an amp to plug into to essentially help clean up the sound as you turn up the volume a bit. So there is that. But if you're already into IEMs at this point, I guess if you know, you know. But yeah, that's basically all I have for these guys. These are, TLDR, these are essentially the IEMs you go to if you were looking at the Starfields and you were like, I don't want a warmer sound, I want something that's more competitive game focused. These are the ones you go to. And if you want to go the opposite direction, you want something warmer, you go for the Starfields. And if you don't have as much money, you don't want as much brightness, you go for the Arias or anything else in that lower bracket. Because once you go below $70, things get really wild, because there's just tons of IEMs with slightly different sound profiles all over the place. It really depends on your taste and how you like music and how you perceive sound, and just a whole bunch of factors. Basically, know what you like before you buy things, because while the sound will suit your purpose, you might personally not like the sound. That's just kind of how things go. So, with that being said, take everything with a grain of salt. So, yeah. So like, subscribe if you this video helped you out, and I guess see you guys next time.